begin this morning with words from the Unitarian poet May Sarton from Santos, New Mexico. Return to the most human. Return to the most human. Nothing less will teach the angry spirit, the bewildered heart, the torn mind to accept the whole of its duress and, pierced with anguish, at last act for love. Return to the most human. As we do each Sunday, together, returning to be together, human and humane. Here as we worship, gathered in this place made sacred by the generations, made sacred by yet more generations upon this land of the Massachusetts and other First Nations people. We have returned, and it is good.
Morning breeze, still and soft, sings to me when the day's begun. Mother Earth awakens me with the heartbeat of the sea, with the heartbeat of the sea.
Our chalice lighting words this morning come from a little bit of a distance, but here present spiritually with us, Patience Gardner. Patience, please share your words.
I would like to light the chalice this morning in keeping with Ken's sermon on touchstones. And the reading is a touchstone for me from the poet Tagore. A sense that he is dying to one thing and being born into another thing. And so I read this because I'm going through transition, and I sense many people are going through transition, and the church itself is going through transition. He writes, I thought that my voyage had come to its end at the last limit of my power. The path before me was closed, that provisions were exhausted, and the time come to take shelter in the silent obscurity. But I find that thy will knows no end in me, and when old words die out on the tongue, new melodies break forth from the heart. And where old tracks are lost, new country is revealed with all of its wonders. Tagore.
Thank you, Patience. Just beautiful in the spirit of the Tagore words and your words. I've lit the flaming chalice of our faith. Now we sing a hymn that I expect we are all familiar with. You might hear Cat Stevens going through your head, but this is an old hymn, an old Gaelic melody with words by someone named Ellen Farsian. Morning Has Broken. It's number 38 in your hardback hymn book. Number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Praise
singing beautifully. Good morning, and a warm welcome to our Old Ship Meeting House, to old timers and newcomers alike. Welcome in and from. So welcome to all of you on Zoom as well. I'm looking at you over there. Good to see everyone this morning. If you are new, we look forward to getting to know you and hope you will get to know us by conversation with us and by exploring our website, oldshipchurch.org. If there are any newcomers or visitors here in the meeting house, I'd invite you, if you like, to stand and tell us who you are so that we might offer a warmer welcome. Please. Christian, good to have you with us. Nice to have you, if only for the day and perhaps another time too. Welcome. Well, everyone is welcome here, as I've said, but also following the service. It's a beautiful day outside. For those of you here, fellowship time, conversation outside. The parish house will also be open if you want to settle down into the fellowship hall for conversation. And the Zoom link will remain open, as it always does, for conversation among the Zoomers. It's not the same as boomers, the Zoomers, whatever age you might be. Most important announcement has to do with the reminder of parish meeting, special parish meeting this evening, right here in the meeting house and also on Zoom at 6 o'clock, but we're invited to check in both on Zoom and to arrive as early as 5:30 in order that we'll be prepared for 6 o'clock. Voting members, everyone's invited, but voting members are those who will be able to vote at this important meeting if you've made a contribution of record during the past year and also signed our membership book. I think you know all this. So we look forward to gathering together again after the service. And finally, a reminder that donations for the Hingham Food Pantry are always welcome at the door as you come in each Sunday, and they will go right to the food pantry later in the week. Thank you for these important gifts. So, time for all ages. I have an ancient story. It comes from what used to be called Persia. Rumi told it. It's probably older than that. And with the end of Ramadan, the celebration of Eid al-Fitr this evening, it seemed appropriate to have a story from that lineage. Some of you may be familiar with this story. It's a story about a poor man in Baghdad. And one night he had a dream. So he's struggling. He's poor. He can't get through barely each day, enough food to eat and so on. But he has this dream. And he dreams that he sees and discovers a buried treasure, solving all of his problems. Problem is, it's in Egypt, in a particular place. Well, he figures, this will solve all my problems. I'm going to travel to Egypt. And he does. And he finds this particular place in the city of Cairo, but he is suspected by the local police of being a thief. So he's arrested before he has a chance to begin digging and find this supposed treasure about which he had dreamed. So he's arrested, taken to the station, and given a really hard time. But he thinks, well, okay, I'll just tell them who I am, what I'm doing. And he tells them the story of the dream. And one of them says, well, you're just a fool. Well, you can go. You're a fool to come all this way just because of a dream. And the policeman says, well, I had a dream like that once, but I didn't do anything about it. I dreamed that there was a buried treasure in Baghdad, and it was at such and such a place, and he describes the place. But I didn't follow that dream. Well, wouldn't you know, the policeman had described the very home that in which this poor man lived. So he hurries back home. He digs in his yard, just where the other man's dream had said, and lo and behold, the treasure had been right beneath his feet all the time. Here ends the story. There's a metaphor there if you didn't catch it. Our anthem, The Gift of Love by Hal Hobson. Oh, excuse me, that's wrong. What comes next? Candles of Joy and Sorrow. thanks for listening to me anyway. You can't always trust me. We move to candles of joy, sorrow, and concern. My apologies. If you are on Zoom, we invite you to type into the chat a joy or a sorrow or a concern if you have something you'd like to share, and we'll share those in a little bit. First candle, as we have been, a candle for peace, candle for the health and well-being of the people of Ukraine, for their freedom, and for all affected by the brutal criminal invasion. Second candle will be for former member, some of you will remember, I'm sure, Martin O'Connor. We just have learned, thanks to Sharon and Rick, that Martin, who had moved to Boston a number of years ago, died this past October. He was only 66, Martin. We extend our prayers to his family. And his daughter, Una, was dedicated right here, as some of you may recall. I light a candle of sympathy for Cindy King, member of our congregation whose husband Bill died earlier this week after a journey with Alzheimer's. He was 87. We extend our sympathy to Cindy and all her kids and families. And from Carol Valentine, a candle of hope for volunteers to help with the plant and estate sale next Saturday, 9 to 2, right across the street. Our last fundraiser for this church year. There's Carol. See Carol if you want to help out. So I light these first several candles as spoken. For the people of Ukraine, the family of Martin O'Connor, for Cindy King and all of her family, and for volunteers, a candle of gratitude and hope. Anyone here in the meeting house with a joy, sorrow, or concern you'd like to share? Maureen. Well, the rest of us have never done anything like that. So happy birthday to Janet Asnes. Recently, yesterday, to Corey Fitzmarquez, candles of gratitude for all that they do. Yes. Trish.
Just a special thank you for International Workers' Day today is May 1st. So just remembering all the workers around the world.
International Workers' Day, a candle of remembrance and thanks for all the workers around the world. Others, these candles can hold more. So hope for your contractor down in Virginia, and it gives you to us back here. Welcome back, yeah, for a little bit. Thank you. Dave, right behind me. Michael, go ahead.
I just like to share in the candle for the birthday wishes to my wife who has a birthday on Wednesday. And also our anniversary was on Friday, and we were married 22 years ago in this place.
Some more birthday wishes, including to Diane, your wife, and happy anniversary.
I'm looking at you.
She is. She's looking at you. Dave, Aline, are there any joys, sorrows, or concerns on chat?
There are several. So first of all, from Janice McPhillips, a candle of joy for the beautiful May basket that arrived on their doorstep this morning. From Jenny Pomeroy, thanks for your prayers. I am stronger. From Janet Asness, a candle of joy for the opportunity to spend time with our youth group at City Reach this weekend. Important work and wonderful people. And finally, from Karen Schneider, a candle of acceptance and the fight against racism for the African students attending the university in Ukraine that are being turned back from crossing into borders into safety.
Thank you, Daveline. Candles for all of those. I think we had one more here. Bonnie, did you have something? Candle of joy for Diane and Michael, your brother and sister-in-law's wedding anniversary. Oh, I'm sorry, Rob and Trish. No, wrong family. What am I saying? There you are sitting with all these anniversary people. Well, happy anniversary to Rob and Trish also, of course. I know that. Well, these candles burn as well for joys, sorrows, and concerns, unspoken, yet deeply felt in hearts among us, whether near or far. I think our youth are probably exhausted from their time at City Reach, but we'll sing Go Now in Peace anyway, even though they're not here. Go now in peace.
Go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere you lay.
And now the gift of love. Well, that was more than worth the wait. Thank you. May we enter a time of meditation, prayer, and silence. Beginning with words of Willa Cather. Where there is great love, there are always miracles. Miracles rest not so much upon faces or voices or healing power from afar off, but on our perceptions being made finer, so that for a moment our eyes can see and our ears can hear what is there about us always. As we settle into our time of meditation, may we be attentive for miracles, our perceptions being made finer within the miracle of this moment, the miracle of wonder of one another's presence. The miracle, the beauty of each breath. Think of it, each breath linking us to all life, to one another, and to all life. Attentive too to the miracle of our love, manifest in yearnings, our yearnings of the heart, our prayers for mutual well-being, for comfort and solace for those who grieve, for justice among the oppressed, for peace among all peoples, for strength amidst challenges, for freedom. We pray to the God of many names, the Spirit of life, to help us turn our hearts and lives towards more kindness, more compassion, more love, as we enter a time of shared silence, and may this time be healing and renewing. Our first reading will be shared. You can hear her footsteps in this old building. Corey Fitzmarquez. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you. Before I start, I just want to say thank you so much for that musical gift of love. It was beautiful. From Matthew, chapter 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes?
Thank you, Corey. Our morning offering. As you all know, on the donate link, or most of you know by now, on the donate link on our homepage, you can give to our Sunday plate offering, which supports all of our ministries, from outreach to caring for one another, all of our ministries, education. You can also give to our monthly special outreach offering, which this month, as our program indicates, go to Outright LGBTQ Ukraine Emergency Fund. There will be a speaker from Outright LGBTQ Ukraine Emergency Fund later this month, but all the month we are invited to make those gifts. And if you're here in the meeting house, you can make your gift to our ongoing ministries by leaving your gift in one of the baskets as you leave this morning. Thank you in advance for your generosity which helps us to continue our sharing, our caring, our reaching out. Thank you. Our offertory, Lyndon Lee.
Shaken, not a quiver on her
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. Our second reading will be shared from a distance, but again, here in spirit with us, Ralph Brown. Ralph, thanks very much.
Good morning. Our second reading is from Walden by Henry David Thoreau, from the chapter Where I Lived and What I Lived For. I went to the woods because I wished to live life deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Here ends the reading.
Thank you, Ralph. Thoreau, well, those are the words of a brash young man. He was not even 30 when he went to Walden Pond. Of course, Jesus wasn't a whole lot older when he shared his stories and parables and wisdom. And Emerson, who gave us the words to our next hymn, though he lived to be a great age, most of his most famous writings were written when he was in his 30s and early 40s as well. Wisdom knows no age. So our next hymn is We Sing of Golden Mornings. It's number 44 in your gray hymn book. 44, We Sing of Golden Mornings. My sermon this morning is Touchstones. It's a version of similar sermons I've preached on other occasions. Touchstones. What is a touchstone? Well, for me, as many of you have been hearing over the past few years, including in a class I taught on the theme, the word for me describes those passages, quotes, lines, and so on from a variety of books and sources, ancient or modern, that I have found myself returning to over and over again. Words of wisdom or solace or inspiration that have helped me along my life's journey, guided me in my ministry as well. Now, more technically, as I discovered after I was using this word for myself in this way, the word touchstone is quite literal. It's a dark-colored stone of some sort. It might be fieldstone or slate, which is used to test the purity of a precious metal, maybe silver or gold. I don't know how all that works. I could look it up. I probably did, but I've forgotten. Wikipedia tells us, metaphorically, that a touchstone, quote, refers to any physical or intellectual measure by which the validity or merit of a concept can be tested. So if we follow the metaphor, just as the touchstone itself is not the precious metal, so the touchstone words are not themselves precisely the truth. The precious metal, metaphorically, is the truth, but the truth is often beyond words or can't quite be spoken altogether in so many words. As one of my touchstone texts put it, many of you are familiar with the opening verse of the Tao Te Ching, the way of life. It says, the Tao that can be spoken, the great way that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Well then, in this morning's reading from Henry David Thoreau's Walden, we heard one of my touchstone passages, lines no doubt familiar already to many of you. From this chapter, where I lived and what I lived for. He was telling us his purpose, telling his readers his purpose. First couple of lines again. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. So it seems to me that Thoreau was saying that his years, the 2 years that he spent at Walden Pond were themselves meant to be touchstone years, times when he could test his living, to test the meaning of life. My father, who was a surgeon, as many of you know, he once told me, because Thoreau was important to him as well, he once told me that for him, his Walden Pond was the operating room. He went into surgery, he told us. He was curious about the mystery of life. And he also wanted to do something worth doing, some good, do some good in the world. So he knew he could do some good as a physician, and maybe close to life and death, he'd learn something about the meaning of it all. So the operating room was his Walden Pond, he said. For me, it's been here, of course, in this meeting house, in the parish house across the street, in conversations with you. This has been my Walden Pond. Very different from Henry David Thoreau's little cabin. We've got, how many pews? Almost 100 pews here. He had 3 chairs in the cabin, 1 for solitude, 2 for company, 3 for society. If you had any visitors more than 3, they went outside. This said, contrary to reputation that he's generated, solitude was important to Henry, but he was also a social guy. He would wander back into town almost every day, I don't know how often, maybe have dinner back at home or dinner with the Emersons. And his walks were not just solitary walks, often with a friend, more often than not, his dear friend Ellery Channing. He led huckleberry parties. He loved skating with other people. Ice skating was all the rage back then. And you could skate almost anywhere back then in those cold winters. There's some wonderful stories of, think of it. Thoreau, Emerson, Hawthorne, skating together. There's a wonderful, anyway, I won't go on. That's another story. But back to the quote. It seems to me that the quote from Thoreau's Walden that we heard from Ralph, and I repeated a bit of, is a particularly good example of a touchstone passage. For Thoreau was writing about his own quest for touchstones, hoping that that by reducing his daily life to its simplest terms, he might discover something of what life had to offer. You heard all that. But he also knew he'd had readers. He surely hoped he did. He would. Not so many in his lifetime as he might have wished, but millions since. He was aware that by naming his own effort to see what life had to teach, he was inviting readers to do the same. Many of us have been maybe all of us, one time or another, been among those readers. I first read Walden a little over 50 years ago and was drawn into a similar search or quest by the young Walden's, the young Thoreau's declaration. Now, I've never lived 2 years by the side of a pond in that quest, but I have lived by the side of many books over the course of years and passages within books. By the way, some of those books are going to be available at the estate sale coming up and available for you over the next number of weeks as I clear my study, so pay attention. I'm afraid probably not my very favorite ones, but a lot of good ones, even so. So I've been living with books, touchstones that I've measured against my own experience over the years, over the decades. Thoreau did this too. He was a reader of books. And in Walden, he has a couple of passages, a whole chapter on reading, titled Reading. And he wrote specifically of his reading by the pond. He wrote this: "My residence," meaning the cabin by Walden, "was more favorable not only to thought, but to serious reading, more favorable than a university. And though I was beyond the range of the ordinary circulating library, I had more than ever come within the influence of those books which circulate round the world." He meant the classics, and not just the Greek and Roman, because so many of the so-called Eastern classics, from Buddhism, Hinduism, the Persian classics, had come into translation, and those too became meaningful for Thoreau. And of all these, he wrote later in the same chapter, "By such a pile, we may hope to scale heaven at last." He went on, "There are probably words addressed to our condition exactly, which, if we could really hear and understand, would be more salutary than the morning or the spring of our lives, and possibly put a new aspect on the face of things for us. How many a man," he wrote, "how many a person has dated a new era in life from the reading of a book?" Think of it for yourselves. Think of something you read, maybe dated a new era. And this is what I'm talking about this morning. For me, but also as an invitation to you to consider what your touchstones are and have been, to return to them if you've forgotten them. And they might not be words only. Maybe for maybe for all of us, we also have touchstone music or touchstone works of art that we return to that inspire or guide us, some of which may have dated a new era in our lives. And I'm also wondering, here at Old Ship, I'm wondering if there are touchstone words, principles certainly, that we share, that we carry with us, that inspire us together, that guide us together, and will continue to guide this congregation into the future. I'll say a little more about that later. But first, all this said, I want to give you a few more tastes of some of my touchstone passages and pages of texts gathered over the decades, not through some grand ambition to collect a library of wisdom, but just organically as they came to me. You've heard most of these before at one time or another. Emerson again: "Within us is the soul of the whole. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one," which he capitalized. Or again, Thoreau, good for today. He wrote, "Only that day dawns to which we are awake." That echoes back to the Willa Cather too, right? Or Whitman, you know I can go on and on with Whitman, said, "I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars." Or more from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount: "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." And this, which we heard earlier: "Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, there will be your heart is." I suppose we could say the other: "Where your heart is, there is your treasure." So we could, this will preach a whole other sermon. Notice where your heart is. And is that what you want your treasure to be? And moving east, the Hindu Upanishads: "Perennial joy or passing pleasure. This is the choice one is to make always. Perennial joy or passing pleasure." Or still within Hinduism, in the Bhagavad Gita: "You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of the work." You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in this world as one established within oneself, without selfish attachments, and alike in success and defeat. And the Buddhist, Dhammapada, one of the earliest Buddhist texts, hatred can never put an end to hatred. Love alone can. This is an unalterable law. People forget, it goes on, people forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, quarrels come to an end. People forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, quarrels come to an end. And back to Rumi, we heard the story earlier. Most of you know this one. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And he also said this, I go into the Muslim mosque and the Jewish synagogue and the Christian church, and I see one altar. Now, not all of my touchstone passages are from 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Here's just two. And you've already heard Willa Cather and Whitman, but Whitman was a couple hundred years ago. But here's two from more or less contemporary poets. Mary Oliver, now of blessed memory. You know this one. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I could fill another page with Mary Oliver, as many of you could. Or Denise Levertov, we heard these words last week. Elizabeth read them. We have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to love the earth. We've only begun to imagine the fullness of life. So much is in bud. You know, let the buds of the season now be a metaphor for us today. Well, there's so many more lines such as these that have become part of the warp and weave of my life, informing my musings, not just capital M that I put in the newsletter, but my musings and reflections, many of which I have shared with you over the years, on what this mystery we call life is all about, or might be. And over time, I've come to realize that my collection, which goes on for pages and pages now of touchstones, is not just a random collection of stuff I like. It's that, a collection of stuff I like, but there are threads of meaning that I've discovered weave their way. You've already discerned some, I believe, I expect. These are threads that I think, for me anyway, stand the test, even of these times in which we are now living. I've been thinking to myself, what about this evil that we see in Ukraine? Do these words stand the test of such times? It's not the first time, after all. Well, Jesus knew such times. Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau, they were writing in the pending shadow of the Civil War. It's not the first time of brutal war and so on. So I do believe they stand the test of even these times, with democracy threatened at home and abroad, climate change, and the ongoing brutality of the war. So here, very briefly, some thoughts that I have discerned from my touchstones that if I find, if anything, are more important in times such as these, in these times, not wishful thinking, not trivial affirmations. I think, for me anyway, bits of essential wisdom gleaned from souls wiser than I. But here in my own words, just a few sentences of some of the threads. First, as best we can, you've heard this already this morning, more than once, as best we can, stay awake, pay attention. Not just to the wonder and beauty, pay attention also to suffering and sorrow, including too often, too much meanness and what we would call and should call evil. And at the same time, notice life is short, but love is, thank you, long. Love is long. So be kind, it really matters, and it spreads. Seek justice and peace as best we can. It spreads, it matters. And good news, I would affirm this, that we enter the kingdom of heaven, Jesus' words, we enter the kingdom of heaven every time we speak the kind word or say something or do something on behalf of justice and peace or healing. So the goal of a truly meaningful life, another thread, is not getting and spending fame and fortune and power, but rather presence, wisdom, compassion, love. And we are able to manifest, each one of us, we're able to manifest such qualities because we are individual manifestations of the whole, the one, as Emerson put it, universe, cosmos, the divine, by whatever name. And more good news, we can choose to journey towards wakefulness and awareness of this fundamental identity and everything that flows from it. There are well-worn paths that we can make our own. Well-worn paths through personal practice, selfless service, by remaining unattached, as the Hindu texts put it, to the fruits and outcomes, just doing what's right because it's right, with faith that our seemingly small deeds of goodness and right do matter and will indeed ripple in ways we can never fully know. And finally, for now, lest much of this feel out of reach, it can feel pretty big. There's virtue in patience. Patience means, among other things, no need to worry about things that are out of our control. And as Rainer Maria Rilke wrote among his letters to a young poet, Rilke was all of 30, writing to an 18-year-old, but he had wisdom too. And these are touchstone words for me also, maybe for some of you. I carried these words in my wallet quite a number of years ago, for a long time. He said, Rilke, be patient to all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then, gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Well, that seems like good advice. I have taken it as such. Maybe you too. And perhaps for our beloved Old Ship congregation as well. We navigate many transitional waters. In any case, it's only the beginning of, to mix metaphors, discerning threads amidst the touchstones. And surely if any of these affirmations are shared among us at Old Ship, and not just here and now, but over the generations, and it might carry then Old Ship into the future, it seems to me that these are, summarizing in one sentence, the call to wake up to beauty, kindness, and love. The call to wake up to our common humanity. All of this leading to the call to do what we can in the direction of peace and justice and of living sustainably on this, our earth, home. Well, my journey with texts ancient and modern, my journey of conversation about things that matter so that we might be more likely to lead lives that matter, will continue, as does yours. Each of you and all of you together in this rich and wonderful Old Ship community of love and faith and kindness, a community of faith that does and will continue to make a difference in this world in ways we will never entirely know, but that will ripple, will matter on behalf of the flourishing of life in this world of joy and woe, woven fine. So it is, so it will long be. Well, you know what I'm going to say. I say it every week. Something like this. I can extinguish these flames, but they were lit with love. They were lit with kindness and compassion. I cannot extinguish those, nor would I try. We carry those qualities with us into our lives. I can extinguish the flame of our faith, but we carry the faith as well into our lives, into the world, touching all those we meet. May we sing again together number 108, My Life Flows On, an endless song, a hymn of peace and justice and love. Walt Whitman, will you seek afar off? You surely come back at last in things best known to you, finding the best or as good as the best. In folks nearest to you, that means look around. In folks nearest to you, finding also the sweetest and strongest and lovingest. Happiness not in another place, but this place. Not for another hour, but this hour. So may it be.